Hey, come on, somebody. Big Rich right here. We're going to have a great time right here at Hammerhead Creations. We're having a great time doing the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about, do you want to do comedy? Man, I run into people. I started doing comedy. Well, I started a long time ago, but I started getting paid for it in my mid-50s. And I run into people all the time. And they're like, Big Rich, how'd you get started? How did you go from open mics to headlining your own shows? What was your process? You know, I get asked a lot of these things, and normally it's right after a show when I'm wired and tired. So don't tell them what I'm telling you. It reminds me of my pastor days. You know, I was a preacher full time for 28 years. Come on, somebody. I'm telling you, I pastored churches from 30 people up to 3,000 people. Well, services. I pastored maybe a church. I think the last one I pastored was about 75 folks, but I worked in churches that had up to 3,000 people in them. So, and I did TV, and I was in all kinds of churches. People say, Big Rich, what kind of church were you in? A good one. That's what I always like to say. Now, the average adult in America is a member of 7 churches in their lifetime. I worked in 3. Yeah, 3. That was it. So that's very unusual. I was at one for 20 years or affiliated with them, 22 years. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I want to get across to you today is, you want to do comedy? Well, let's kind of talk about it. For me, people ask me, you know, when did you know you were funny? I entered a comedy competition. It's what I call it. It was called Gordon Lee High School. That's where I went to school. I graduated class of 86. I was wittiest in my class. Me and my friend Gay Wilhelm, she was the gal, I was the guy. And I won in a landslide, I was told by my science teacher. But I spent 4 years working on that competition. You know, I found comedy. I went from worrying about grades when I hit 8th grade and puberty hit strong. All I cared about was girls, and I learned, for me, comedy got attention. It got the girls' attention. My friends had fun, and I started working comedy. I remember in school, you know, there was a teacher that I had, Miss Hendricks, if you're a Chickamauga person. Miss Hendricks, you probably had a teacher like this if you're from the nuts for sure. You had to call the roll, and she would call roll, and she would start at the A's and work her way through. And when she would get to my name, which was Brock, I would say, Good morning, Miss Hendricks. Good to see you. And she would stop and she would say, Thank you. How was your day? How'd you have a good morning? Yeah, I did. She talked real slow. And then she'd forget where she was in the role, and she would back up and start over again. And then I'd let her get to about the L's, and I would ask a question, and she would start back over at the A's. So her call and roll might take 15 minutes before people around me had enough. They didn't want to hear that anymore. But just things like that, or finding things that were funny to be a part of, I learned that growing up, you know. And I didn't start pursuing comedy. For me, I was 54. And you're like, Big Rich, how did you get into it? When COVID hit the first time, and if you're listening to this, you were a part of it. When COVID hit the first time, I was recently divorced. I had joint custody of my kids. So I had them, and we worked it. They were with me probably 60% of the time starting out. And when they weren't with me, or then when I got COVID, they couldn't come over for like 3 weeks. I was real sick for about a week, and then I was fine, but I couldn't go anywhere. You know, you didn't go out and hang out with people. You were basically at home. I started studying comedy. I went on YouTube. I started looking at how to write 4 minutes, how to write stand up, how to write comedy. And listen, if you want to start comedy and you want to go to a comedy school or a comedy club class, that's great. I mean, knock yourself out, or online. But I didn't want to spend $295 or $500 or $1,000 to get stage time. And see, I already had it. I was a preacher for 28 years. I've preached over 4,000 sermons. I did TV for a decade, radio. So my advantage was I had stage time already all my life. I've taught for a living since I was 21 years old, man. But if you don't have that vehicle, then it makes sense to go to a comedy club or go to a class because they're going to get you some stage time and they're going to get you doing minutes in front of other people. I did when I started. There was one book, Pledge, I'm going to get you to pull this book up by Steve Martin. And this book, I read it, and it doesn't tell you how to do comedy. It just tells you about his life and how he's always had that in him. That's the way I felt. I just waited 54 years not to tap into it because, to be honest with you, like I wouldn't be, but to be honest with you, I love that phrase. I did more comedy as a preacher probably than I should have, but I loved it. And I would tell stories and make jokes. And I had that gift, and I would use that to bring hope, to bring encouragement, to get a point across. And I think I did comedy from the pulpit. I just didn't call it stand up. I was a storyteller. So I had all that experience, and I'm sitting in Ringgold, Georgia, where I was living at the time. And I'm thinking, man, I really want to try this. Honestly, for me, I was at a place with COVID where I got really sick for about 10 days, and we didn't know what we know now. And I thought, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it or not. I felt like a gorilla was on my chest when I'm trying to breathe, and I'm like, man, what do I regret? And yeah, you have regrets. I mean, people say they don't. They're full of, what? I mean, we all have things we wish we'd do better. But the one thing I wish I would have tried that I never did was stand up. So I made a decision. I said, on my birthday, which was, maybe 3 months away, I'm going to go do an open mic. So I got on YouTube. I looked up ways to write comedy. I read little articles. I found a lot of free information that I didn't have to spend money on. I bought Steve Martin's book. I bought some kind of how to write jokes, which I don't even remember what it was. So that you tell you how that helped. But I just got online and I studied comedy 8 to 10 hours a day, sometimes 12. I mean, I got a associate's degree in comedy during COVID. I studied it. I worked on things. I learned what a tagline was. I learned what a callback. And I'd been doing that in sermons. I just didn't know it. I didn't know what to call it. So I took that experience and I've built this comedy through my experiences as a pastor. If you work with people or you're in front of people or you're a salesman or, take Leanne Morgan, man, you listen to her story and how she was selling, I don't know if it's jewelry or something, and meeting women and having them she'd go to their home, she'd entertain them, and then they'd buy her stuff, that if you've got an avenue where you got people around you, man, you can do your stand up for them. You don't have to go. Let me tell you, I've done 5 open mics my whole life. I've headlined 500 plus shows in 4 years, and I've done 5 open mics. And I'm telling you that not to brag. I'm telling you that because I already had the speaking experience. If you're not comfortable speaking, then you've got to go get stage time. And for me, I was 54, man. At the time, I had kids, I had a job, and all the open mics were either Chattanooga or Atlanta. And they all were at like 8:00 at night. And you'd get there and there'd be 30 people signed up. So you figure everybody gets 3 minutes or 4 minutes, and some Nimrod's going over or somebody. You got to sit through a lot and then get home at like 11 or 12 at night. And then I'm going to work the next morning and I'm taking care of my family. I said, I got to find another path. So what I did, I called my buddies. I'd call my insurance agent. I'd call people that I had in my life that I thought had a sense of humor. And I would get them on the phone and I'd tell them a joke or I'd tell them a bit or I'd take them to coffee or to grab a drink or do something where I could work my comedy. I went to business clubs for my job. They give you a minute, 2, sometimes more to talk about your business, I would talk about my business for a second, and then I would do comedy. I would throw in things while I was doing my business presentation and see if I get a laugh. And that's how I work comedy. You don't have to do it just one way, especially the world we live in now. I mean, look at the comedians that are getting booked that are popular now. You've got the ones that do it the old school way through the clubs, but then you got the internet, you got the YouTubers or the TikTokers or whatever you want to call it. You got those guys that are getting booked left and right. And here's the thing, man, comedy clubs are great. I've had the privilege of working a few, but here's the deal with a comedy club, friend. You're wanting to start comedy. There's only 52 weekends in a year. And Christmas, you got major holidays. So let's knock it down to maybe 48. Out of that 48 weekends, a comedy club, they've probably got a third of their comics or people that have been coming to that club for a decade. They're booked already. Then you've got another third that they've been working it. They've been there maybe 5 years, or they're on a rotation where they've got an agent. They, if you take this comic, we'll bring you this big hitter later in the year. So that's a third. And then you've got probably a fourth of their hires are people off YouTube or TikTok. They've got a big social media following. So you're not going to find a spot, if you want to host, and hosting will get you time. I got asked to host right out of the gates. I did a open mic at a comedy club, and very early on, and they're like, "Hey, Big Rich, you want to come up and host?" I'm like, "Yeah, what is it?" And they told me. I said, "What's it pay?" And they said $5 a night. And I'm like, "Well, man, it'll take me that much in gas just to get over here." And you can say, "Well, Big Rich, you got to suffer for your art." Let me tell you something. I suffered enough. I mean, I preached in front of people. Sometimes there was nobody there. The biggest speaking thing I've ever done in my life, I preached an outdoor church service with 8,000 people there. And it was at Miller Plaza, Coolidge Park, my bad. Coolidge Park, did Miller Plaza too, but Coolidge Park, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We did a big Easter thing there, and not everybody was there for the church service. They're out throwing frisbee and walking their dogs and, taking gummies or whatever they're doing. And here I am, and I've got to get everybody's attention. So I learned, I've spoken for the 8,000, but then one time I got to church when I was a young pastor, and I had one baby at the time, and my wife, my youngest, my only son, and then wasn't feeling good. So my wife stayed home with him, and it was a Sunday night service. We had about 50 people coming to the church. It was new. It was a holiday weekend. I thought, let's have church because that's what we do. Because I didn't know no better. I didn't realize you could take a Sunday night off and Jesus still loved you. I didn't know that. So we were having church. I get there. There's nobody there. Well, Big Rich, what did you do? I went ahead and I stood up and I preached. And you might say, oh, that's insane. Yeah, I kind of felt it a little bit, but I was proving to myself that I was committed to do this, whether anybody was listening or not. And I'm going to tell you a side story with that. And this won't cost you nothing, man. There was a buddy, or he became a friend, but he was an acquaintance that lived in that town. He was driving by that Sunday night at our church. It was a storefront in the beginning, a big storefront warehouse with windows all the way across. He said he drove by. He saw me in there by myself, walking around, preaching, had my hands raised, doing all kinds of stuff like I do in my comedy. And he said, man, I turned around and I parked across the street and I watched you for like 10 minutes. And he said, I went home and I told my wife, man, if that guy is either crazy or he's the most passionate person I know, who wouldn't want to go to a church with a guy like that being the pastor? And lo and behold, him, his wife, his 2 kids were the first African-American family to come to that church. 2 years later, We grew, we exploded, and that church was 50% black, 50% white, and maybe 48, 2% of a little bit of everything. But that's how it happened. And I really believe that if I hadn't been willing to stand up and preach when nobody was there, I don't know if I'd have been ready for that blessing. Same thing in comedy. You got to be willing to do comedy in front of the mirror if you have to, or get your dog over there. If you're a crazy cat lady, gather the cats and tell them your jokes, work your material. You've got to work it, and you've got to get used to doing your material. And you might say, what do I do? I want to be like Eddie Murphy. I want to be like Nate. I want to be like Dusty Slay. No, you need to be like you. Find out what you're passionate about. Tell your story. And then you got to find your crowd, man. You got to find your audience. The biggest thing for me in doing Big Rich Brock Comedy LLC, baby, is this. When I started doing shows, I didn't go to places already doing comedy. I went to places that never had done it before. My first show I ever did, well, let me back up. Those open mics, and then I'll tell you about the first show. Those open mics, I did 5. I did the Comedy Catch, was my first one. Recently divorced. I get up there. There's literally like a lot of open mics. There are 15 comics, and there's like 8 people there in the crowd. And that's another thing. Comics are the worst audiences you're ever going to get, because most of them are looking at their notes or they're just sitting around. They're not interested in coming. Well, why don't you invite your friends? Here's why I don't invite my friends to open mic. To me, going to an open mic is like watching a T-ball kid practice. Nobody wants to watch that but mom and dad. When my boys were little, I went to all the midget football practices, all the baseball. I'd go to basketball because I loved it. They're my kids. It's their life. My hobbies for 20 years was what Luke, Jack, and Pete were doing. I had a high school student 15 out of 16 years. So football, basketball, and baseball were a part of our lives for 25 years. So that's what I did. But nobody wants to watch that except mom and dad. That's the way I feel about open mics. I did my first one. I took a picture and I put it on the Face World. That's what my mama calls it if you come to my shows. I put it on Face World, and people started responding. Man, why didn't you tell me? I'd have been there. Why didn't you tell me? I said, I'm practicing. And I know an open mic's got to make money. So we got to figure that part out. And people do like coming and seeing new comics and this and that. But my few that I did, the first 3, I didn't invite anybody. And then I did after that, because I'm working things. I'm practicing. I'm trying to figure it out. And it's okay. People ask, what do you go for? What do you look for in doing an open mic? If you're new to open mics and you show up, man, I'll give you the advice that was given to me by a seasoned comedian in Chattanooga area, Janet Williams, the Tennessee Tramp. Now, her comedy is the total opposite of Big Rich's comedy. You won't see us working together, but I appreciate her. I respect what she does, and she's seasoned at it. And when I started, the first show I ever did, somebody in the crowd took a recording on their phone, and they knew her, and they sent it to her and said, man, this guy just went an hour in this bar, and he had everybody. He had them. He rocked it. And she's like, I won't tell you what she said, but, fill in the blank, obscenity. And he goes, no, for real. She said, give him my number, have him call me. So I called her a couple days later, and we talked for maybe 90 minutes. And she encouraged me. But the thing she told me, she goes, you need to be around other comedians. You need to find a place to get around other comics. And when I'd go to those open mics, I would show myself friendly. She says, just be friendly, be you. Some people were really nice. Some were assholes. That's the world we live in. But those people that were nice, Here I am 5 years later. I've hired all of them multiple times to do shows with me. Some of them 15 or 20 times because we developed a connection. You're going to find your group. You're going to find your people say, I don't like that because it's a clique. Don't look at it like a clique. Find you a small group. All of us need a group of people that we can share things with, that we trust, that we connect with. Now, there's a lot of them out there that I don't. I try to be kind. I'm going to treat people like I want to be treated. But when you're doing comedy, I went to places, like I said, that didn't have comedy. I wasn't looking to go. Somebody else has worked hard to establish a show in a brewery. I'm not going to go to that brewery and say, hey, can I do a show here? They already got one, for God's sakes. They already got it. Somebody's made the way for that to happen. I respect that. I might not respect the person, but I respect the fact they did the work. So if you're new to comedy, find you somebody that's producing a show. After you've done your open mic, send them a tape, say, hey, I would love to do your show. And then you got to respect their brand. I do clean comedy. Now, here's the thing I've learned the hard way. Clean comedy for a guy doing a show in Cartersville, Georgia is different than clean comedy from downtown Atlanta, from a 30-year-old. I had a guy come in. I told him, I said, hey, keep it clean, no cursing. He got talking about stuff that my audience, they started walking out. He walked people. I mean, we had 50 people there. He walked 8 of them. Was it his fault? No, it's really my fault because I wasn't specific. Now, if I'm specific and then he does that, oh, that's on him. But you've got to figure out when you're producing a show, you've got to be more specific, tell people what you're wanting, and respect the brand. Some of the best comics that I work with around my area, they respect my brand. Now, they don't do clean comedy, but when they do my show, they do. And it gives them an opportunity to work clean because you can get more opportunities when you work clean. So I got ready. I did those open mics. I did Comedy Catch. Then I went to Laughing Skull, Midtown Atlanta. I did Laughing Skull. There you have to email them and get on the list. I didn't know what the list was. I emailed, here's all I said. If you're new, keep it brief. I've learned now, just keep it brief. I said, hey, I'm a former pastor turned comedian. I've done an open mic. I'd like to come and do yours. Later on, I found out most people, it's like 6 to 8 weeks before they heard from them. I got to do mine 2 weeks later. And I didn't know that was a big deal. But the way I found it out was after I did my set, I went and I thanked the guy. I found out who I sent the email to. He worked there. I thanked him. I looked him in the eye, said, thank you for the opportunity. He said, hey, you're welcome, man. He goes, when you said you were a former pastor, we thought you'd either suck, and that'd be funny, or you'd be pretty good. So we felt comfortable doing it. So show kindness to people. When you're at the open mic, thank the people that put you up there, man, that gave you the opportunity. You ain't got to brown nose them. We won't look that up, Pledge, but we'll just talk about be kind to people. So I did Laughing Skull. First time I did Laughing Skull, I did okay. It went all right. Then I did it again. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they let me come back. And on that one, that was the night. If you're looking to do comedy or you've been doing it, and you remember your time, that was the night I knew I could do this and I could do it, make some kind of living. There were 27 comics on the night. Oh, Lord, you ever been to one of those? And probably 6 of them were serious comics. I remember some of the names that were on that night. Catherine Blanchard was on there. She's touring now. She works with Bert Kreischer, David Spade. Nick Murphy was on that card that night. Nick's works a lot, travels a lot. And then there were a few others spaced out in between there. Joe Smith hosted it that night. I think he's in San Diego now. But then there's people. There was a dude that was homeless and just somehow got his name put on there. And he walks in and he's a hobo, literally. And he did 3 minutes. He just stood up there and did whatever. There's people that've never done it before. They got spots. Then there's people that have been doing it for years. So it's a good mix. I remember out of 27, I was number 22. I sat through 21 other comics for 4 minutes to get to my time. And I asked, I didn't realize. So if you're new to this, I didn't realize you're supposed to stay in the back. They wouldn't let you in the green room, but they had an like a room that put us all in. And if you've ever been in one of those, basically it's just a bunch of people reading their notebooks or looking on their phones. A few of them know each other, and everybody's trying to be funny or a smart ass or all that stuff. And I walk back there. I'm the oldest one in the room. Come on, somebody. I'm the old man in the group. I'm looking around. I'm dressed like I'm dressed right now, like your dad, if you're younger, listen to this. And I stand back there and I'm like, I'm not learning anything here. So I asked the guy, I said, can I go out there? He goes, well, we're sold out, but you can stand in the back if you want to. And I'm standing back there, and this couple were like, hey, you can sit with us. I'm like, no, I'm good. He's like, no, come on. And they were like 25. They had like a booth. So I sat with them, and I'm just watching, and I'm learning some good things. I'm learning what not to do because I'm learning comedy. Wherever you are in an open mic, take that time to learn from the environment, man. If you're wanting to do comedy, learn. I watch people that knew how to get the crowd's attention. I watch people that sucked. I watch people that did great. I watched the crowd respond. I watched the lighting. I just took mental notes. But anyway, I'm sitting there with this couple. They have no idea that I'm going up. And it's pretty funny because he got up to go and get her a drink. And I just leaned over to her and I said, are you guys having a good time? She goes, yeah, it's okay. And the show's fine. And I said, are y'all, married? She goes, no, this is our first date. I was like, oh my gosh, your first date. I said, how's it going? She goes, and she did that. And I thought, oh God, man, bless this guy's heart, man. That's a Southern term for what an idiot, bless your heart. But I'm thinking, what am I going to do to help this guy? So she comes back 5 minutes later. She goes to the restroom, and it's me and him. And I'm like, hey, man, y'all dating? He goes, it's our first date. I said, really? Well, that's nice. How's it going? He goes, oh, it's going great, man. I'm having a great time. And I'm thinking, oh, brother, if you only knew. So she comes back, and I get up, and, as she's approaching, I elbowed him to get up, to be a gentleman. He did that. And then maybe 2 comics later, I'm next. So I said, guys, I'll be back in a minute. Do you mind watching my coat? They're like, nah, man, cool. They probably thought I was going to the bathroom or something, get another drink. And next thing you know, I walk out on stage. And I did 4 minutes, and you can find it on YouTube, but that 4 minutes, it changed my life. Because out of 27 comics, there were 4 or 5 that I was in that group. I got the laughs. I connected with the people. When I got done and I walked off stage and went to the back, all those younger folks were sitting back there like, who the hell is this guy? Then they started talking to me. Then they started inviting me to open mics or shows they were doing. And I still laugh because one guy says, hey, we do another one of these at 12. And I'm like, at night? He's like, yeah, you want to come and do a spot? I'm like, no, I'm going to sleep, man. I got a wife and kids and a job. I'm not on my daddy's money. I got to get up in the morning, go to work, And I go get my jacket, and that couple was waiting on me. And I did a clean, that night, I was the only clean comic. I didn't swear. My stuff was very, it was funny, but it was clean. And when I got done, that couple brought me my jacket. And that dude's like, man, you were great. He says, you didn't effing, but he didn't say effing. He goes, you didn't effing cuss one effing time. He goes, that was effing amazing. And he kept using the F word. And I got tickled. And I said, well, you cussed enough for both of us, and started laughing. And they left. And he goes, let me know when you do a show. We want to come. And I thought, brother, you ain't coming with her. She's having a time, you know. Well, lo and behold, they showed up at one of my shows about a year later together. Come on, somebody. I thought that's pretty cool. But we get in to these open mics and you do your open mics and you go and work material. Here's another thing I didn't know because I didn't know about comedy. I knew preaching. If I preach on Thursday, I can't preach the same thing on Sunday. Everybody's like, you got to have a new sermon. Every open mic I was going to, I was bringing new material every time. And another comic's like, and I was like, why do y'all all do the same thing every time I hear y'all? Well, that's what you do. You work it out. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing stuff new every time every show I did, every open mic, I thought it had to be new. So I've learned. And yeah, you write new material, but you're doing material. See, for me, instead of an open mic, even today, I have a show that I do in Ringo, Georgia, Caffeine Addicts. I do that show every month, usually third Friday, but it varies. I do that show, and that show is 10 minutes from my hometown where I grew up. So I have people from my high school, my community. I have people come to that show I hadn't seen in 40 years, man. And it's a hoot. And that show is different than a lot of shows I do because most of the time I'll see maybe 15% repeats or 20 in my show, which is pretty strong. But that show, I'll see 60% of the crowd. There's 50% of that crowd that's seen me 40 times, 30, 50. I mean, they come to that show religiously because they like to see how the sausage is made. You know what I'm saying? They want to see me work material. That's where I work material. I'll take an hour sometimes and I'll work material, and they're paying me to work material. So that's the difference now versus when I started out. So I encourage you, first of all, and don't try to be somebody else. You got to find your voice. You're not going to find your voice. You want to do comedy? Most of the time, you're not going to find your voice in a week. I'd done probably 30 shows that I headlined before I truly found my voice because I did it in an unconventional way. Most of you that want to do comedy are going to do it the conventional way, or you'll do it through social media, but you'll go to a show, you'll do free shows. There's 10 comics. Everybody gets 4 minutes or 7 minutes. And that's cool. If that's what you got to do, and that gets you stage time and it gets you experience. But I had all that in my previous life. I had all that experience. So I did 5 open mics, and then I decided I was turning pro. I booked my first show. Where did you book it? What comedy club? No, I went to a place, and think about this, and this is any kind of business you're in. I went to a place where I spent money. I went to a wine bar that me and my ex-wife spent money at, and I'm sitting there spending money, having some drinks, and then I threw out there, hey, have y'all ever done comedy here? I see you do music. No, we haven't. Have you ever thought about it? Huh, no, do you know anybody? I said, yeah, me. And when I said me, everybody around just kind of chuckled. And then, of course, there's always somebody that's got a good buzz on them. Well, let us hear something. And as soon as they said let, I was ready. I jumped up, stood in front of everybody. I got on a chair and I started doing 5 minutes or maybe 4. And I did a couple bits. I got laughs. I said, if I do a show here, will y'all show up? And of course they all said yes, because they're all buzzed. But I talked those people into it. And here's what I suggested. I said, guys, give me your slowest night. What is it? For them, it was Wednesday. So I did my first show on a Wednesday, 7:00. They closed at 6 because they didn't make no money. And I put it on the Face World and I told people. And then I called my friends. My biggest decision when I started was I going to charge $5 or 10? And my ex-wife, I'll give her credit. She said, go for 10. If they'll pay 5, they'll pay 10. So I did. And I hired 2 comics that I met at that first open mic I did. And I paid them, and I told one to do 15 minutes, one to do 20. And then I got up and I did 50 minutes of what I do. And I had 47 people at $10 a pop, paid the other 2, paid my little marketing. And then I thought, well, I did it. Here's what happened. I put pictures of it on my social media. I get a message the next day. Hey, what were you doing down there at the at the wine bar? And I said, well, I did a comedy show. How long you been doing that? I said, 1 show. And he's like, you want to come do one here? I said, I'd love to. We put it on the books. And that was at Big Door Vineyards in White, Georgia, right there, on the line of Cherokee County and Bartow County. I was a customer there. That's why they knew me. I spent money there. They knew me. They gave me a night to do comedy. And guys, I have done in 4 years, I've done 47 shows there. I mean, a lot of shows. I picked up other gigs while I'm there, and I've got to entertain people. People come from all over the country, actually all over the world, and visit that winery, and I've got to entertain them. So what I want you to see is there's more venues than a comedy club for you to do comedy. Pizzeria, man, I've done shows there. I got to do a show, the 3rd show I did was in my hometown at a bar that held 42 people. I had 96 show up. We packed them in there like sardines. Last time I heard, I was the 3rd biggest crowd they ever had in there. The other 2 were country music people that are in Nashville now. But I had the time of my life doing that show. That was a free show, past the tip bucket. Did great on that night. So find places where you spend money that you have a relationship with. Look for opportunities. And listen, you're probably not going to get Friday or Saturday night starting out. You're going to get a night that they're going to roll the dice. What I did was like, hey, after it went well, I said, hey, let's do 2 more. Let's spread them out, do 3, see how we like it, and then go from there. I have 4 venues that I've done shows for either monthly or every other month for 4 years now, and I keep them. And there's always some jackleg that calls them. It's like, hey, I see y'all do comedy. How about me doing a show? And without me saying, they all say, hey, you want to do comedy here? Great. Call Big Rich. He might hire you. Oh, no, I do my own stuff. See, when you treat people the way you want to be treated, it comes back to you. And those venues have helped me. They like my brand. They like what I do, and we have a good time with it. So get yourself in front of people, work your material. If you want to go to a comedy class, like I said, go for it, but you don't have to. And look at what you're going to, because you're really paying for stage time. Nothing wrong with that. If that's the way you got to get it, I totally understand. But there's there's some great comedy classes or schools that meet online or meet, in our area. But then there's others. I'm like, what are y'all doing? What? I did a show. I won't say where in Florida, but I did a show in Florida, and they hired a host to do the show, and he bombed. If you know comedy, you know what bomb means. He bombed 4 times in one show because he was the host. He bombed at the beginning, and then he tried to redeem himself after he announced the first one. He bombed even worse. Instead of just announcing the 3rd guy, he bombed again. So there's 3 bombs. Then he tried again I told him when it got to me, just say former pastor turned comedian. He didn't. He tried more jokes. He bombed. Then after my set, he tried again and he bombed. So he bombed 5 times. Man, that's like Hiroshima. I mean, he bombed 5 times in one show. And when I got up, I the crowd, the other comics would get them up, they'd dig out of that hole, and then he would come right back in and start fill the hole again. So off the top of my head, when I took the mic from him, I said, "Hey, y'all make some noise." I named each comic and everybody clapped. And then I got to him and like 2 people out of 100 clapped. And I said, "Come on now." I said, "This is his make-a-wish, for God's sakes." He's wanting to do comedy, and I did this whole bit about him being a make-a-wish, and this was his goal, and he struggled and blah, blah, blah. And everybody laughed, and he was a good sport because he knew, and I told him, I had to throw you under the bus to get the crowd back to be able to do the show. And he was cool with it. And then I stayed over because it was the beach area, and I'm online looking on my phone, and all of a sudden pops up on my Facebook, comedy class, $20 a session. And it was that dude teaching it. That guy at the community center. And I'm like, what the hell is he going to teach somebody? He bombed 5 times in one show. We all have those moments, but my point is figure out what you're paying for. If you need stage time, man, create your own with the people in your life. So get that figured out. There's a lot of free material on YouTube or ChatGPT. It'll lead you to where you need to go, and you can figure out how to get a shell and how to get started. And then once you do that, you just got to start practicing. Get in front of the mirror, hold your hairbrush or whatever you got, your toothbrush, and work it. And then take it out and tell it to somebody else, because that is the parts of it that you need to know. Now, one other thing with that, I did a dry bar comedy special. If you hadn't seen it, I encourage you to watch it. I've had over 1 million views. It came out December 2023. I filmed it May of 2023. I started doing comedy 9 months before I filmed that thing. We'll talk about that another time in detail. But what I want you to see is when I showed up out there, they had no idea I've been doing comedy just 9 months, because I was a pastor for 28 years. I had the stage presence already. I had my voice. I knew what I wanted to do. So, but I look at that tape like a lot of comics when they do their first special. I look at it and think, God, man, that was horrible. I could have done so much better, or I'm so much better now. That's what I hope you see. If you don't see improvement, maybe this is just something you should have tried and then move on to pottery or something else, But if you see improvement as you grow, then stay with it. There's people that love playing music, but they ain't got no business playing in front of other people, There's people that love whatever passions that there are out there that bring you excitement, make you happy, you enjoy it. Stay focused, but realize doing stand-up, man, you got to be vulnerable. You're going to stand up a bunch of strangers and you're going to try to make them laugh. And everybody's got stuff going on in the world, and it's your job to entertain them, whether it's 3 minutes, 4, whatever. And speaking of getting to do that, man, I'm excited. I got shows coming up. If you'll see them we'll pull them up here for you to look at. BigRichBrock.com. You can get your tickets. I'm going to be in Erwin, Tennessee. I'm going to be in Nashville this weekend. I'm going to be in places all throughout North Georgia. I'll be headed down to Florida, to Panama City again, doing shows, private events. If you're a business and you want a corporate show, I do a lot of corporate events, clean comedy, good people. We'll have a lot of fun. Keep watching the podcast. Come out to a show, support comedy. And I hope you have a great week, a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.